The room went completely quiet after that final revelation, but what happened next was even more unexpected, because your soulmate did not simply walk away from the psychic and forget what they had heard. The words followed them. They replayed in their mind while they drove home, while they tried to sleep, and especially during those quiet moments when there was nothing left to distract them from their own thoughts. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and this part reveals what happened after the reading. Don't skip, because the most important realization was not revealed in the beginning. It came later, when your soulmate was alone and finally allowed themselves to think about you without pretending they did not care. They remembered your face. They remembered your voice. They remembered the moments when you had looked at them as though you could see through every excuse they had ever made. And suddenly, small memories that had seemed insignificant before began carrying an entirely different meaning. A simple message from you. A conversation that lasted longer than expected. A moment when you encouraged them. A time when you noticed something was wrong even though they insisted everything was fine. They remembered the way you listened. They remembered the way you could make them feel understood without demanding anything in return. And then another memory surfaced, one they had tried to push away. There had been a moment when you needed reassurance, but instead of giving you a clear answer, they hesitated. Perhaps they thought they needed more time. Perhaps they were afraid of becoming too vulnerable. Perhaps they assumed you would still be there whenever they were ready. But now the psychic's warning had changed the way they saw that moment. What if your patience had never been unlimited? What if your silence had not meant you were waiting forever? What if, while they were trying to figure themselves out, you had been quietly learning how to live without their attention? That thought was difficult for them to accept. Don't skip now. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate began to realize that your past was not simply a story you carried. It had become the reason you valued actions over words. You had already learned that beautiful promises could disappear. You had already learned that someone could say they cared and still leave you confused. You had already learned that attention could be intense one day and absent the next. And because of those experiences, you were no longer impressed by temporary emotions. You wanted something steady. Something genuine. Something that did not require you to constantly wonder where you stood. The psychic had apparently seen that clearly, and now your soulmate could see it too. That realization created a strange mixture of regret and determination. Regret for the moments they had wasted. Determination because they suddenly understood that if they continued waiting for the perfect moment, there might eventually be no moment left. They began asking themselves questions they had avoided for months. What would I say if I had one completely honest conversation with them? What have I been afraid to admit? What if they already know how I feel? What if they are simply waiting for me to stop hiding behind uncertainty? What if the reason this connection feels unfinished is because I have never actually given it a fair chance? Stay till the end. Don't skip. The answer to those questions became clearer as the night continued. Your soulmate realized that they did not want another distraction. They did not want another temporary connection. They did not want to keep comparing every new interaction with the feeling they experienced around you. They wanted clarity. And that realization was more powerful than any prediction. Because when someone finally becomes honest with themselves, their entire behavior can begin to change. The psychic had not magically created those feelings. She had simply given your soulmate permission to acknowledge what they had been avoiding. And now, alone with their thoughts, they could no longer pretend the connection meant nothing. They remembered how strange it had felt when you became distant. They remembered checking for your messages without admitting they were waiting. They remembered wanting to tell you something and then stopping themselves. They remembered moments when they almost reached out but convinced themselves that tomorrow would be better. Tomorrow became another day, then another week, and eventually the distance began feeling normal. But it was never truly normal. It was simply easier than facing the truth. Something huge is waiting for you, so stay with me. Because the next realization changed everything. Your soulmate understood that they had been waiting for you to make the first move while you had been waiting for evidence that they genuinely cared. Both of you may have been standing on opposite sides of the same silence. Both of you may have been wondering whether the other person still cared. Both of you may have been protecting yourselves at the exact same time. And that is how powerful connections can become complicated. Not because the feelings are absent, but because fear speaks louder than honesty. Your soulmate realized that every day they spent waiting was another day in which you could become more comfortable without them. And that thought frightened them. Not because they wanted to control your life, but because they finally understood that your heart had a choice. You were not obligated to wait. You were not obligated to keep the door open. You were not obligated to remain emotionally available simply because there had once been something beautiful between you. If they wanted another chance, they would have to earn it through consistency. The psychic's words had turned into a challenge. And now your soulmate was thinking about how to respond. Don't skip. Stay till the end, because this is where the story becomes even more personal. Your soulmate began thinking about the first time they truly noticed that you were different. It may have been a conversation that seemed ordinary at the time. Maybe you said something simple, but the way you said it stayed with them. Maybe you looked at them during a moment of silence, and they felt an unusual sense of recognition. Maybe you helped them through something without realizing how deeply it affected them. Whatever the moment was, they remembered it now with greater clarity. They realized that their attraction to you had never been based only on appearance or excitement. It had been connected to the feeling of being seen. Around you, They felt that they could not easily hide behind the version of themselves they showed everyone else. You noticed details. You heard what they did not say. You recognized when their smile was real and when it was simply a mask. And that made them nervous because being understood can feel more vulnerable than being admired. They could impress other people. They could control how others perceived them. But with you, they felt exposed in a completely different way. And perhaps that was why they sometimes pulled away. It was easier to create distance than to explain why someone had become so important. It was easier to say, "I need time," than to say, "I am afraid of how much this matters to me." But the psychic had apparently recognized that pattern. She told your soulmate that the distance between you had not erased the connection. It had simply hidden it beneath unanswered questions. She said that your soulmate had been trying to protect themselves from disappointment, while accidentally creating the very distance they feared. Those words stayed with them. They began thinking about every time they had chosen silence because speaking felt risky. Every time they had acted casual when they were actually deeply affected. Every time they pretended not to notice your absence. Every time they told themselves they were fine when they were not. And suddenly they understood that avoiding the truth had not made the truth disappear. It had only delayed the moment when they would have to face it. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate was about to confront the most uncomfortable question of all. If they truly cared about you, why had they allowed fear to make so many decisions for them? That question had no easy answer. Maybe they were afraid of rejection. Maybe they were afraid of commitment. Maybe they had been hurt before. Maybe they did not know whether you felt the same way. Maybe they believed they needed to have everything figured out before approaching you again. But now they understood something important. Nobody ever becomes completely fearless before choosing love. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that honesty is more important than hiding. And that was the lesson they carried from the psychic's room. They did not need another prediction. They needed a decision. They needed to decide whether they were willing to stop hiding behind uncertainty and finally show you what was real. The thought of contacting you became stronger. They opened their phone. They looked at your name. They stared at the conversation. Their finger hovered for a moment. Then they stopped. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they suddenly realized that a casual message would not be enough. They did not want to send something meaningless just to test whether you would respond. They wanted to say something that mattered. Something honest. Something that could not be misunderstood. And that was when another memory came back. They remembered a time when you had once told them, directly or indirectly, that you did not want to keep guessing where you stood with someone. That statement suddenly sounded completely different. about yet, and before you dismiss this as just another story, I need you to stay with me, because the moment your soulmate heard what the psychic revealed about you, the entire atmosphere in that room changed. Nobody expected your name to become the center of that conversation. Nobody expected a simple question about love to uncover something connected to your past. And most importantly, nobody expected the psychic to look directly at your soulmate and say, "The person you are asking about is not who you think they are." That sentence alone was enough to make everyone silent. Your soulmate had gone there with questions. Perhaps hoping for reassurance, perhaps searching for clarity, perhaps trying to understand why the connection between you has felt so unusually powerful. But what they heard was far beyond what they were prepared for. The psychic did not begin by describing your appearance, your personality, or anything obvious. Instead, she spoke about a chapter of your life that you rarely discuss. A chapter you may have buried beneath years of silence, growth, and pretending that everything was fine. She said there was a period when you had to become stronger without receiving the support you deserved. She said you learned how to smile while carrying questions nobody could see. She said you became independent not because you always wanted to be, but because life taught you that you could not always wait for someone else to understand what you were going through. Your soulmate reportedly froze when those words were spoken because they had noticed something similar in you but had never been able to explain it. There was always something behind your eyes, something beneath your calmness, something you protected even when you were laughing. And suddenly, according to the psychic, that hidden part of your story was beginning to make sense. Don't skip this part, because the revelation becomes even more surprising. Stay till the end, because something huge is waiting for you, and the most important detail has not even been revealed yet. The psychic continued by saying that your past did not simply make you stronger, it changed the way you recognize people. You learned to notice small changes in someone's voice, the hesitation before an answer, the difference between genuine affection and temporary attention. You became someone who could sense when something was not being said. Your soulmate may have wondered before why you sometimes become quiet instead of arguing, why you can suddenly pull back when something feels different, or why you seem to understand emotions before people explain them. The psychic claimed that this was connected to what you experienced earlier in life. You had learned to observe before trusting. You had learned to listen before opening your heart. And according to her, this was one reason your connection with your soulmate felt different from ordinary relationships. You were not simply looking for someone to love you. You were looking for someone whose actions could finally make you feel safe enough to stop analyzing every little thing. That statement reportedly struck your soulmate deeply. Because perhaps they had mistaken your caution for distance. Perhaps they had mistaken your silence for indifference. Perhaps they had wondered why you did not always respond the way they expected. But suddenly they were being told that your behavior had a history. There was a reason you did not give everyone immediate access to your heart. There was a reason you needed consistency more than beautiful promises. There was a reason one small disappointment could sometimes affect you more deeply than you admitted. The psychic then said something that made the room completely still. She said, "Your soulmate has survived something emotionally that most people never noticed. Not physically. Not through some dramatic event." She was talking about the invisible kind of survival, the kind that happens when a person keeps moving forward while carrying memories they never explain. She said you had reached a point where you stopped begging people to understand you. You stopped chasing explanations. You stopped forcing connections that were not meeting you halfway. And that transformation was the reason your soulmate had entered your life at this particular stage. Whether you believe in psychics or not, the story became powerful because the details seemed to connect with things your soulmate had personally observed. The psychic reportedly told them that your greatest secret was not some scandalous event or shocking mistake. Your greatest secret was how much you had changed after being disappointed. You became quieter, wiser, more selective, and far less willing to lose yourself just to keep someone else happy. Your soulmate had perhaps been trying to understand that change, but they had been looking at the present without knowing the story behind it. Now they were being shown a different picture. And then came the sentence that made your soulmate reportedly lean forward. "They are not afraid of love," the psychic said. "They are afraid of giving their heart to someone who does not understand its value." Think about that for a moment. Because there is a huge difference between someone who does not want love and someone who has learned to protect themselves before giving it away. The psychic said your soulmate had been interpreting your boundaries as uncertainty, but your boundaries were actually evidence of growth. You were no longer the person who accepted every explanation. You were no longer impressed by temporary attention. You were no longer willing to confuse chemistry with commitment. Something had changed inside you, and that change was exactly what made this connection so intense. Don't skip. Stay till the end. Something huge is waiting for you, because the next revelation was not about what happened to you. It was about what your soulmate realized about themselves after hearing your story. The psychic reportedly turned toward them and asked a question nobody expected. "Why do you think you were drawn to this person before you even understood them?" Your soulmate had no immediate answer. And perhaps that silence said more than words could. Because sometimes a connection begins before the mind has a logical explanation for it. You meet someone, and something about their presence feels strangely familiar. You may not know why you remember their expressions, why their voice stays in your thoughts, why one conversation can affect you for days, or why distance somehow makes the connection feel louder instead of quieter. The psychic said that your soulmate had been trying to find a rational explanation for that feeling. They had called it attraction, curiosity, coincidence, timing, or simply emotional chemistry. But she claimed there was another layer. She said your soulmate recognized something in you that reminded them of a part of themselves they had forgotten. That was the moment their expression changed. Because the revelation was no longer only about you. It was about the mirror you had become in their life. You were reflecting something back to them. You were showing them where they were still afraid, where they were still uncertain, and where they had been avoiding emotional honesty. The psychic said that meeting you had forced your soulmate to confront questions they had avoided for a long time. What do I actually want? What kind of love am I capable of giving? Why do I run when something becomes serious? Why do I think about this person when I am trying not to? Why does their silence affect me more than it should? Why does the possibility of losing them feel different from losing anyone else? And then she revealed something even more astonishing. She said your soulmate had already experienced a moment when they realized they might actually lose you. Maybe it was a period of distance. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe it was simply the realization that you were becoming less available to them emotionally. Whatever the exact circumstance, the psychic said that moment awakened something your soulmate had been trying to ignore. Suddenly, your absence became louder than your presence had ever been. They started remembering details they had previously overlooked. A particular conversation. A particular expression on your face. A moment when you were there for them without asking for anything in return. A time when you listened even though you were struggling yourself. A moment when you encouraged them while quietly dealing with your own emotions. Those memories began returning one after another, and according to the psychic, that was when your soulmate realized that what they had with you was not ordinary to them. It had become part of their emotional world. They could distract themselves, but they could not completely erase the feeling. They could become busy, but certain thoughts still returned. They could tell themselves to move forward, but something about you continued pulling their attention back. Don't skip now, because this is where the story turns. The psychic said your soulmate had not hired her merely to ask whether you loved them. They wanted to understand why you affected them so deeply. And what she revealed was that your connection was tied to timing. She said you entered each other's lives after both of you had already been changed by experiences that made you more cautious. You were not meeting as the same people you once were. You were meeting after lessons had already been learned. That meant this connection carried a different kind of weight. It was not innocent in the sense of being unaware. It was innocent in the sense that neither of you could easily pretend you did not understand what was happening. Your soulmate knew there was something